Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for a very exciting discussion around how to encourage local jurisdictions to adopt better permitting and inspection for solar and storage. My name is Kristen Ardani. I'm an analyst and manager at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and I'm joined today by 3 expert panelists. The way we're going to run today's session is as follows. I'm going to start by providing a few brief introductory remarks to provide some kind of topical context to the discussion. I'll walk through a little bit of NREL data and set the stage for our panelists. We're going to move into some kind of polling questions to get some audience interaction. And then we're going to move pretty quickly to moderated Q&A and then open discussion via the polling everywhere, where you'll get a chance to ask questions openly at the end. So without further ado, I would like the opportunity now to introduce our expert panelists. We're joined today by Bill Clay, the Principal for Solar Power Pros, Karyn Boenker, the Public Policy Manager for Sunrun, and Larry Sherwood, the President and CEO for the Interstate Renewable Energy Council. So thank you for being here today. So now I just kind of want to jump in with a little bit of kind of data to set the stage, and this will just be maybe 5 or 6 slides if you can bear with me. I think it will help provide a little context to the discussion that we're going to have. So why are we talking about permitting and inspection? Well, part of this has to do with PV system prices and the soft costs associated with installing a PV system. So here you can see the DOE, Solar Energy Technology Office, 2030 levelized cost of energy targets. On the far left-hand side here in red, you can see in LCOE terms that for residential solar, we were benchmarking LCOE around 51 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, the DOE goal is by 2030 to get residential PV system LCOE down to 5 cents a kilowatt hour. That's going to require aggressive reductions in both hardware and non-hardware components of PV systems. In the middle, you can see kind of a similar story for commercial. And then for utility scale, we have seen more rapid declines in LCOE, and we are kind of getting more confident in our ability to say that we're achieving or on track to achieve the DOE targets for utility scale. But residential and commercial present a very different picture. So let's think about this in a slightly different way now. This is data that NREL has been collecting since 2010 in terms of dollars per watt. So installed price for PV across scales. Again, on the far left, we have residential system pricing from 2010 to 2018. Commercial, and then on the far right-hand side, utility scale. At a really high level, because I'm not quite sure how clearly we can actually see this on the screen, I can just talk through this very briefly. You can see that installed PV system price since 2010 has come down dramatically. In the residential market segment, for example, we were benchmarking PV system prices above $7 a watt, $7.34. As of one of our most recent benchmarking studies, installed system prices are now being benchmarked below $3 a watt on a national average. So taking into account kind of the variation in pricing across regions, we're now benchmarking resi at $2.70 a watt, which is amazing. But what perhaps is more interesting about this picture is that hardware costs have come down much more rapidly than non-hardware costs. So here you can see a chart of soft costs or non-hardware costs as a percentage of PV system price. And that's to say, despite the fact that soft costs have declined by 35 to 75% over the last 9 or 10 years across segments, hardware costs have not, hardware costs have come down much more rapidly, and soft costs have not kept pace with those declines. So look at the green line, for example. This is utility scale, and then the blue bar at the top, or the blue line at the top, that's resi. Back in 2010, we were estimating or modeling that soft costs represented 54% of installed PV system price, And now as of our most recent benchmark in 2019, it's up to 67%. So soft costs or non-hardware costs continue to be a bigger chunk of installed system price. So what is driving some of that soft cost kind of dynamic and hardware coming down faster? Well, it's partly due to the distributed PV approval process. This typically involves two distinct processes, one through the local building permitting jurisdiction, and then a second through the utility for interconnection. So today's conversation, we're going to really focus more on the local building permitting process, which would include building and electrical permitting approval and then final inspection. But note that soft costs can get really tied up in this process. There's human dynamics at play. There's kind of back and forth between application submittal and review. So developers or a customer will start by submitting their building permit application. They then have that reviewed by the relevant AHJ, and they get their approval to build. They'll then build the system, and then they finally need to have a final building inspection. And again, there can be a lot of back and forth in that process that adds to the time and cost of PV. Another thing I would note is that while the building permitting and the utility interconnection are separate processes, there's a certain degree of coordination between the two that can also add time and cost to PV systems. So for example, prior to the utility granting a system permission to operate, prior to the utility saying, okay, you can flip the switch and energize your system, they typically will require verification that the system has received final building inspection from the relevant building permitting authority, which could be the city, the municipality, or the county. That's to say, these two separate processes and entities need to coordinate on information sharing in order to get the customer system energized and turned on. So some of these processes can really add to time and cost, which is what we're going to talk a little bit about. We're going to talk more about today. So with that, I kind of want to jump into some audience polling questions. And what we're going to do here is we're going to get your thoughts on the permitting and inspection issues, and then we're going to ask our expert panelists to weigh in after and see kind of where there's alignment and where there might be differences. So starting with our first question, from the industry's perspective, that is to say solar developers, installers, and others, what are the most pressing challenges related to solar and storage permitting and inspection? So again, we're going to use the pollev.com/ruggedsun956. If everyone's with me with that. Please make your selections. So our first choice is variation in requirements across authorities having jurisdiction, or cities or municipalities or whoever is in charge of issuing the permit. Lack of online and streamlined processes. Option C, for processing delays and multiple rounds of submission needed. And option D, none of the above. Maybe you think it's something entirely different that we haven't thought of, which would be also good to discuss. Curious to hear your thoughts. So at this juncture, it looks like most people who had an opportunity to respond to the audience polling question have identified variation in requirements across AHJs as one of the most pressing challenges related to solar and storage permitting and inspection, now tied with processing delays and multiple rounds of submission needed. So that's kind of an interesting thing to note. At this point, I kind of want to get our panelists to weigh in on what do you see as the most pressing challenges related to solar and storage permitting and inspection, and how does it kind of compare to what you're seeing from the audience?
Sure, I'll jump in. Hi, my name is Bill Clay. First of all, thank you for having me here. Just for context, I'm the owner of Solar Power Pros. We work up and down the Front Range of Colorado, so we get to see 60 to 70 of these jurisdictions in action on a daily basis. And it's interesting to watch this thing kind of move around, so people definitely have different perspectives on this. My personal perspective is I'd love to take the easy way out and say all of the above, because that's easy, but not fair. So if I had to choose one of these, I would probably choose A, recognizing that B and C are certainly important, but for me, standardization is the most important thing. I'd sacrifice a little bit of streamlining and efficiency if everything was the same. I don't know how much you know about Colorado, but we're a home rule state. So the cities, they create their own regulations and their own permitting standards and whatnot, and they are very different. And you don't have to look very far to see that. Denver, where we're sitting today, is extremely different than neighboring Aurora, both on a permitting perspective and the cost of that permit, as well as the inspections on the back end and how many inspections they have, and the requirements for the people sitting those inspections. So for me, as a business owner, if I have standardization across a variety of these AHJs, it's just easier for me to build processes around it and to know what to expect. And so I would lean more heavily towards A.
Yeah, my name's Karyn Boenker from Sunrun. I'm a public policy manager and lead for something that is called the Solar app. That is the solar automated permit processing portal that we are developing as an industry with NREL here. And it relates to this polling question because I think it solves all of these. And I would agree that variation, I agree with the tie actually, but variation requirements means that you have to have highly skilled engineers and individuals on your team at all times, keeping track of this stuff at the national level, at the local level, the state level, and then that causes processing delays in multiple rounds of submission when you can't get it straight, when you don't have a perfect database or there's not a public place to look this all up. And imagine how expensive this is for a small solar company, much less one the size of Sunrun. So, you can see how quickly this would add up and take 2/3 of our cost. And it's not just about this research and keeping up to date and these people that we have to hire, but then it's also about, do I have to drive out and turn this application in, and how long is it going to take me, et cetera? And then that uncertainty around the time period hurts the customer experience and drives cancellations as well. So for every week or two that you see beyond a normal timeline of approximately 2 to 3 weeks, you start to see 5 to 10% of a cancellation rate. So it's a really serious problem because that's the most expensive part of our business. Everything we do leading up to install is, it's half of the whole the whole experience with the product. And then last, I think that if you go online, I think the reason why some people might be skeptical about an online system is that I'm sure all of you that are in the business have seen that even if a AHJ has an online processing system, if they don't make it mandatory, and some people are still turning in paper applications and some are going online, that AHJ loses control of how to prioritize and queue these applications, and you actually end up with the same amount of delays as the paper process. So, I think these are sort of step-by-step, all related. I do think there's a lot of solutions online and streamlined processes, especially, and in fact, I would say exclusively when they are required. And we'll talk about that as we go through the presentation.
Larry, any thoughts?
So my name's Larry Sherwood, and I agree with what the others have said. And I think that the online and streamlined processes in fact help with the variation and the delays. So if you have a process that is online and is streamlined in how the approval process goes through, then the actual requirements that streamlined system is evaluating for have been standardized almost by definition because they're in that online process. So I do think that as we move forward, we're going to look at standardizing the processes across different jurisdictions, and that will take a collaborative approach that we can talk about later. but the result of that needs to be something that is streamlined and efficient and online, because the other part of, well, you're going to ask another question, and I don't want to answer that question yet. But it's the delays and the time is money in these installations. So we want all of these things to take time out of the process.
Thank you for your thoughtful answers. We have another audience polling question to hear your thoughts, and then we're going to ask our expert panelists the same question and kind of see, again, how the results line up. So our second question here is, so we just talked about the industry's perspective and what is, difficult. Let's look at the AHJ, or the authority having jurisdiction over the building permitting process. That, again, could be a city, municipality, in some cases even a county. What are the most pressing challenges for the AHJ related to solar and storage permitting and inspection? First choice, rising application volumes. Please choose A if you think it's rising application volumes and difficult to keep up with the growth in solar. Option B, for lack of technology-based solutions for application processing. They just simply don't have the tools they need to keep up with the volume of applications. Option C, for duplicate permit applications from competing developers and or canceled applications. For whatever reason, the developer or the customer is choosing to withdraw their application, or maybe they have more than one for the same system. And then last, please choose D if you think it's training and keeping up with new technologies, and if you just think it's none of these, choose E for none of the above. So we'll give folks a chance to respond to that.
Neck and neck.
So it seems that for those of you who were able to respond, you really think that training and keeping up with new technologies is what's most challenging for the AHJs, followed by a close second, rising application volumes, especially in certain markets where we're seeing solar grow really quickly. And now the majority for option D has grown a little bit more there. So curious to kind of pick the brains a little more of our expert panelists. Maybe you could tell me, Bill, how do these results kind of strike you? Does this align with your experience, or do you have anything sort of different to add?
It does. I would say, kind of related to the last answer as well, these are somewhat related answers here. If you take a step back and you look at what the AHJ does, for the most part, they're not just doing solar and storage. They're looking across all kinds of different domains, and they're having applications come in for all different trades. And so when you're in an economy that's growing, or in an area that's growing, and they are seeing rising applications, you kind of have this double effect, or double whammy of we're also in a tight job market. And so it's hard to keep the personnel and the employees on at AHJs, or grow them quickly enough to keep up with that rising volume. And so you also get this, people are behind, and you'll hear them all the time, whether it's your inspector or your plans reviewers, that there's a lot of work on their desk. And I definitely empathize with them because they're understaffed in a lot of cases, and they're trying to get the work done. You can imagine in that type of environment, you're always behind. It can also lead to less time to do training to keep up with new technologies. It can also lead to morale issues. And so I think that's what's going on in a lot of these jurisdictions we work within. They're just trying to keep up. They're doing the best they can with what they have to keep up. And so to a degree, those are interrelated as far as I'm concerned. The only thing I would throw out in addition to this would be, for those installers that are out there that have a tendency to be on the receiving end of that and want to naturally immediately complain about it, or be upset with your plans reviewer or with your inspector, please just recognize that these are people that are trying to do their jobs in a system that might be stretched and challenged. And so I found in my own experience, it's better to empathize with those people and talk to them about what you could do collectively, as opposed to demonizing them, because that's not going to work in your favor anyway. So that's all I have on that one.
I just want to double down on that idea of collaboration. You know, an AHJ is not an adversary to the solar industry, not at all. They are, in fact, our allies, and we have to treat them that way. And these are government officials with very limited budgets. And here's the great thing about number one. If they view that as a problem, flip it. Oh, you have a rising application volume. Does that mean your revenues are going up too? Because they get paid for every application that we submit. So that first problem is actually a good thing. But I agree, it is a big part of the problem currently, and we need to help them solve it. The second part, the training, I want to leave to Larry because of the expertise that IREC has. But this is something we definitely heard when Larry and I and others from the Solar Up campaign went to visit the International Code Council in DC last year. They told us the two, and this will surprise you because it conflicts the answer here, the two biggest problems they received from AHJs and surveys they did regarding the solar industry. Training, yep, but they actually said the duplicate application problem was bigger. Because what happens when we face these delays, we all run to the AHJ to turn in our permits because like, I could shave off a couple of days if I just get it in now. But the customer may not really be ready yet, or we're not even to site audit, or the customer's still shopping around and didn't tell us that, whatever. The AHJs see this as sort of manipulative sometimes, or they see us as trying to usurp the process when they don't see like we're really just trying to race the clock. And some jurisdictions around the U.S. have gone so far, as you saw that process that Kristen laid out earlier, where mostly it's parallel between the AHJ and the interconnection process. You can do both at the same time. Well, some AHJs have solved this duplicate application problem by saying, I'm not going to give you a building permit or even let you apply until you give me proof that you have approval to build from the utility. Well, one of the things we're trying to solve in the Solar Up campaign as an industry is to get rid of that approval to build requirement from the utilities. So what are we going to give them? How are we going to prove what application is real? And we'll talk about some solutions, but the Solar App is an online portal that's going to automate building permits for residential solar systems and produce automatic and instant permits that have gone through advanced compliance checks. Every question that a building or a design reviewer would be checking physically on a design plan or a single line diagram, whatever they require, we can ask in a question and have a system know whether or not it was the right answer. And so if we can get basically the entire building permit process automated, it doesn't matter if we all run to the gates to turn in duplicate applications, and probably we'll stop doing it when we know we can just get an instant permit and tell the customer, like, you're going to be ready to go in a couple days, as long as the utility process is also kind to us. So very exciting. We'll talk more about it.
Great.
So on training, the IREC has partnered with the International Code Council and the International Association of Electrical Inspectors, and we have developed training for code officials, both in-person training and online training. And I totally agree that training is a really important part of this issue, and it needs to be ongoing training because the codes change every 3 years, and there are always lots of changes in the solar and especially nowadays in the storage parts of the codes, and code officials need to be up to date on how to do that. And I would just recommend to you that for our online training, that is available to anyone. There's a very small fee to take it. The code official earns continuing education credits. So if you have code officials who are new or having problems with inspection, that's a really good vehicle to suggest to them. And we're working on developing related similar training in storage applications. I'd make 2 other comments on this survey. I would definitely say that if this was a crowd of HJs, number C would be the highest one. So just realize that your annoying the building officials when you do that, and that's not to your advantage. And on A, if we're going in the path that we want to go in to get 100% clean energy, we're going to need to see the volume of applications rise dramatically from where it is today. And so we have to be developing solutions that will work for an order of magnitude higher of applications that the HJs are seeing. And being government officials and sort of slow to respond to what's happening, that's where I think the industry really has to step up and provide the tools so the HJs can process these applications, just even if they weren't doing it faster, even to do it at the same speed with 10 times as many applications. That's not going to be possible in the current way that they operate.
And I wanted to add, because you reminded me, Larry, that number C, ICC told us that the volume of duplicate and canceled applications is approximately 20 to 30%.
Wow.
So it is pretty significant for them. And that's work basically on a project that never comes to exist. So the solar app solution is about, hey, let a computer handle everything leading up to installation. Once it's installed, that's where you can dedicate your human resources.
It's interesting to think what would happen if we could get rid of the duplicates or the speculative applications and see if that would help the HJs focus on the real ones. But there's no real way in the real world to do that based on the way the system is set up now. Because it's that race against the clock, like you mentioned. It's like that's a quagmire.
When at Sunrun, when we think about time, 30% of our applications mean we need 30% more headcount.
That's right.
So.
Interesting. So now we've spent quite a bit of time kind of talking about the challenges from both the industry and the AHJ's perspective. I think it would be beneficial now to kind of pivot towards what can we do about this? What are some of the solutions? What looks kind of promising on the horizon? We've heard from Karyn a little bit about solar app. But I want to pose to our panelists at this point before sort of opening it up a little bit more to the audience is, what do you really see as the most impactful solutions or win-win approaches that could address the industry and AHJ challenges that we've discussed thus far? We can popcorn, or we can go down the line again, whatever you prefer.
Just to address the issue in the first slide on standardizing the processes and standardizing how HJs think about that. There is an organization in California called the Sustainable Energy Action Committee, and that is a group of code officials, industry, and test labs that they meet once a month. People bring to the meeting a problem that they're having with code officials, and depending on the issue, they appoint a working group of both HJs and industry people and come up with a solution that they then publish that installer can use to show the code official what the standard way is to deal with this. And code officials in California say that typically these recommendations get stapled to, well, if it's a paper application, stapled to the application and submitted. And IREC has just won a federal grant to administer that program and take it national. So we will be looking at problems that you have that you can identify that you're seeing in variations from community to community on how they're enforcing the code, and then get a group of experts together to figure out what the right solution is often there's a short-term solution of what you need to do with the way the code is written today to deal with that problem, and a long-term solution that might be rewriting the code to make it clearer what needs to happen. And just 2 examples of issues that SEAC has recently dealt with in California. One is the issue of PV parking structures, so the PV over parking. And in California, and this potentially could be an issue in Colorado, the fire rating of those parking structures has been an issue, and in San Diego, they have not been approving them because they're not fire rated. But the current fire rating system is designed for PV on buildings. And so you have to have a roof in order to have the fire rating. And so basically, it's not logical how they're interpreting in San Diego, and it's sort of a problem. So that's one example. And another example is with the coming of rapid shutdown requirements. And code officials are very confused about the standards and the listing and what they have, what are they really looking for the rapid shutdown equipment. And so SEAC is writing a white paper that basically is just explaining how it works and what's in the code and what the testing labs are doing, so that the code officials aren't misinterpreting things and asking for listings that don't exist, which is what happens in some cases. So I'll pause and...
And Larry, SIA is the industry leader in this group, right?
Yeah, so this group is a big partnership of different organizations, because really having these collaborative consensus ideas is partnership. So we have the code organizations, and we also have SIA and the Energy Storage Association and the firefighters and the state fire marshals. So all of these different groups can be at the table and in a non-pressure situation. So a code vote is not on the line. A permit approval is not on the line. People can calmly and logically talk together and talk through these problems and come up with a solution that people can then use in many jurisdictions.
And I know it sounds like a dream, but it has been very successful in California. And I'm personally very excited for IREC to have this grant at the national level. And I think that they're going to absolutely destroy all their goals and milestones ahead of schedule, and this will just continue. I think it's going to be very impressive. So make sure that if you don't know IREC yet, IREC, that you look them up because it's a very valuable organization to the industry. And of course, engage through SIA. I am the chair of our SIA's permitting DG group, so a little plug there too. But any route through SIA will work. But win-win solutions, I'm here to talk about Solar App. I'm really excited about it. It's an online permitting portal that'll be given to AHJs for free at no cost. Installers will be able to use it for a small fee per project. That'll just help us to keep NREL on as a potential neutral software developer and a long-term host that will be able to keep it up to date and put a nice logo on it. We're looking right now for a long-term host for this portal. Some of the candidates are the entities that are a part of IREC's SEAC organization. Or let's keep going with these acronyms like ICC, IAEI, NFPA, UL, all of them that you know. CEC in California, governor's offices, energy offices, all that are going to get involved in helping us actually advertise this thing. All those I just named are helping us build it right now. You know, in line with everything Larry said, the first step in our process was to take guidebooks and rules from all across the country, give our databases to NREL under an NDA to figure out, you know, what are all the processes we're currently seeing, where are the commonalities, where are the differences, and really just build out every single question an AHJ might ask according to code year, et cetera. And having a computer, again, read the answers. It may take us, 15, 20 minutes to fill out this application, but to have an instant permit turned around, seconds after we press submit, it's pretty big. You'll also know corrections immediately because there'll be a little green check mark that tells you did it right versus, hey, this isn't a compliant answer. So it's really exciting, and we're seeing a ton of interest already, especially here in Colorado. The Colorado Energy Office is going to be a big part of this, the governor's office in California as well. And this is just expanding, in fact, so rapidly that it's pretty wild. So this portal will actually be available for you all to see. I believe the date we're talking about with NREL is March 16th. So an announcement will go out through NREL. You can also go search Solar App on the web right now. You'll find a Solar Foundation website. You'll find a CIA website. You'll find an NREL website. Any of those will give you directions for how to get involved and be part of the webinars we have. But this portal will be available for not live testing, but just picking it apart, debugging it by I think April, and then we will be able to test it on live projects this summer, and then it will be available nationwide by the end of the year. So this is exciting. I need you all to start making good friends with your AHJs. I need you to find me the right person that's excited about this kind of thing. Bring them to the Solar App campaign. We really need those contacts that you've built. If you have relationships with mayors, city managers, they're especially important because they care about how much it costs right now to be processing that 30% of canceled and duplicate projects. And when I tell a mayor, hey, we're going to raise your revenues and we're going to get your head count needs stabilized because you can apply them all to inspection, that's music to their ears. So. Very exciting.
I'm excited about it.
Me too.
So as part of COSSA, I'm a member of the Codes and Standards Committee, and just to reflect on some of the things we've done, as well as some of the other efforts that have been led in Colorado, frankly with mixed success, mixed effectiveness, but still I think in the right vein. So I'll just cover that real quickly. So about 5 years ago, Colorado, then COSSA, kicked off a Solar Friendly Communities campaign. It was basically covering not just the permitting aspects of solar, but also certainly the inspections, as well as licensing and other areas. It was fairly well received. It was still early on in solar, and we had about 20 communities involved in it, and they did take some of the requests and requirements and asks and fold those into their processes, and it was nice. It was nice to do business in a jurisdiction that had some kind of metal rating around that overall program. Generally, they were lowering costs and getting their applications approved quicker and following some of the inspection asks of the community. SolSmart picked up on a big part of that as a national campaign and was able to launch that out to 200 plus communities, and I think on their way to 300 plus communities. And so those are all good programs. They're outreach programs, right, to these AHJs about what does good look like as far as at least the solar community is concerned. We need more of that. Like I said, those were effective. Things have changed quite a bit since then, both technology as well as the growth in these areas. We just need more collaboration of those vein, not just in the permitting space, but also in the inspection space around those processes. My plug is, we're on the Codes and Standards Committee. If you are a Colorado installer and do installations in Colorado, we welcome you. Please come to the Codes and Standards Committee. We love to have involvement, especially people that deal with the HJs and are experts in this arena. Because it's obviously, there's a lot of them, and having that expertise on our side to kind of interface with them really goes a long way. The only other thing I'll point out is that one thing that I've seen that was semi-effective was overall legislation and regulatory actions in this space. I don't know who remembers here if you're doing business in Colorado or not, but Colorado passed the Fair Permit Act back, I think, originally in 2011, and then re-upped it in 2018. And basically it said something to the degree of, hey, permits are not going to cost more than $500 if it's a residential permit, and not more than $1,000 if it's a commercial permit. And so that's an example of something that I think was done in exactly the right vein to try to reduce soft costs across the state. And you've seen the standardization thing raise its head again because certain AHJs adopted that and went with the spirit of it. Denver being a great example, $59 residential permit, one of the lowest I think in the state. And where other AHJs took it right to the limit of the $500 and then decided to apply their use taxes to that as well. And so, permitting fees that are 10, 20, maybe even 30 times what they are in Denver. So again, that comes boiling down to, it's not going to be a top-down, one silver bullet mandate that all these HJs are going to do the same. No, that's not going to happen, especially in Colorado. This is a collaborative effort that has to happen with each HJ, and getting them to a standard is, I think, the right approach. So,
Well
my
said.
2 cents.
Just want to note that COSSA, Codes and Standards Committee, is where we're working on solar app and the plan for Colorado. Colorado Energy Office is involved. So yes, if you want to, it's a really good place. I'm part of the committee as well.
Well said. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. I think at this point it might be a good idea to take some of the audience questions.
Yeah, that one's
There's one in particular that has risen to the top that is beyond permitting. Where else is there potential for soft costs to be decreased substantially?
Yeah, I'd love to take this
Go-
one.
go ahead. Nail it.
Permitting is just half the problem. From some of the early research we did, it's about 50 cents a watt. Interconnection is also about 50 cents a watt. Big deal. The other part of the puzzle, the soft cost puzzle, is affected by interconnection and permitting is those customer acquisition costs. So I think when you solve the interconnection and permitting timelines that delay installations, then you can actually decrease the cancellation rate. But I do want to point out for a second how important all of our work is on resolving interconnection blockers. They're less so our allies, and yet we can still build those relationships with utilities. In NVE, I shared the fact that the IOUs in California, all three of them, actually have their interconnection applications start after installation. NVE called SCE in California, got the story directly from them, and called me back and said, "This is a great idea, let's do it." We had to also say, hey, if you don't, you might see legislation. But it worked out. It was the end of their incentive program. They understood the value. They had faced headcount issues for years. It was the #1 call I got from them. And so this was the solution. And we're seeing this in the biggest utilities. No blocker to install in the biggest utilities. So any argument that it's about capacity or safety is the reason why I have to check your application before you install, I don't know. Go ask the ones with the much higher volume if that's the case. Because we've got PG&E, SCE, SDG&E in California. We've got Excel here in Colorado that has an optional approval to build process. You've got the two biggest utilities in Texas, Oncor and CenterPoint, that don't have approval to build processes. You have the biggest utilities in Florida, which is you see in this national spread too. There's no pattern. It's in OUC, TECO, and Duke. They all have these automated processes. Con Ed in New York has a near instant process. This is where they all need to go. And over the last couple of years, most utilities, they've got more money than the AHJs, and they've spent that money wisely on going online and putting their processes online. And that's made a huge difference too. So I just want to always point out, when we're talking about permitting, it's really because these AHJs need more help from us, need more resources. In a lot of cases, we're talking about low-income AHJs because we all know that low-income people do adopt solar and at pretty impressive rates. And there's low and high-income parity in 4 states in the United States right now. So, those are the places especially that don't have resources. And that's where we need to step up. A utility can get there on their own. We just need to have those collaborative conversations and certainly engage in interconnection proceedings and some of the more technical stuff that can be intimidating, but is really worth it. And you can learn a lot from IREC if you need to catch up on the current interconnection standards.
And on interconnection standards and what IREC works on, we're doing a lot of work in what I would say is really for the next generation of interconnection and making that as possible and easy as we can do. And so examples of that, doing a lot of work on smart inverters and how smart inverters are going to be interconnected and how that's going to change the rules, and a lot of work on storage systems, and especially working on the issue of in a lot of places, people are looking at the PV system capacity and adding the storage capacity to that and saying that's the capacity that we're using for what the impact is on the grid, and therefore putting many more projects into expensive studies and not fast approval, where in fact the people who are installing the system want to use the storage on site, and they don't even want to export that to the grid because there's no economic advantage for that. So how do we convince the utilities of that? And the goal is to make it as simple and to use the simplest interconnection procedures when you have the solar plus storage and not being kicked into the harder ones. And then I think a long-term goal definitely of things like Solar App is to have those two lines that were showed at the beginning of a permitting track and an interconnection track, have them be one process that is automatic and online, so the appropriate information goes to the utility company and the building official, and they're automatically approving it, and the whole thing happens fast.
And on new technologies, I just want to note, those utilities I mentioned, most of them also have post-install storage processes. So it's not a new idea.
Yeah, a slightly different take on this one. I agree with the permitting. One of our bigger pains is more around the inspections as well. We just to put it in perspective for variation, again, this is just residential solar. I'm not even talking about adding storage onto it. We have AHJs that are basically have one inspection, a final electric inspection. So you get to go to those homes, do your entire install, and then basically call in an inspection. It's efficient. All the way to, we have jurisdictions that require 4 inspections, right? You got a rough electric, a final electric, a rough building, a final building. Well, that's 4 different inspections. It definitely makes that job a lot more choppier. So that's just one example of a standardization around inspections. Some other ones are windows. It would seem pretty simple, like, I'm requesting an inspection. What time will the inspection be? Well, we have some jurisdictions that are very tight on that. They will tell you, you're in this 1 hour, 2 hour block. All the way to, the old cable answer of you need to be home from 8 to 5, sometime I might show up. So it's really tough. It's a lot of expense and cost associated with putting a person out there from 8 to 5 to be on site. We've got jurisdictions that don't necessarily care as long as the person that is there can answer questions, set up ladders, those types of things, to wanting an electrician on site. So it's a wide variety of requirements across the HJs on what is required in the inspection space, and it drives a wide variation in costs to service that. So again, I harken back to collaboration with these AHJs can help maybe get a standardization that might make sense. And yes, I would take something less streamlined as long as it was standardized personally, so I would know what to expect in those jurisdictions across the board.
And just to be clear, in the work that IREC will be doing on collaboration and standardizing processes, both permitting and inspection are part of that project.
So we'll take another audience question, if that sounds good to everyone. So how about as newer energy codes are adopted, we're seeing adders for homeowners rising to hundreds or even thousands of dollars of additional costs. So how are jurisdictions informing residents and mitigating impact of these updates? And I think I'm also kind of curious about this question because sometimes it seems like the information flow is more customers or developers asking the AHJ questions and then the AHJ getting back to them. So are there examples of the AHJs being proactive in terms of communicating broadly, or how are jurisdictions informing residents of things as they change? Any examples of best practices where we see like something working well on this front?
I don't know if you guys
So I
have.
think
personally
this-
haven't seen it.
I think this question refers to energy codes that are more trying to enforce energy efficiency standards on buildings and have new requirements and new items for those. I don't think this is relating to the codes that would govern the safety of solar or storage installation. So but I think, I guess my feeling would be, it would be nice to think of the jurisdictions as doing education of the customers, but I think the reality is that the jurisdictions have too much to do and not enough money. And I think we cannot rely on the jurisdictions as the place where the customers are going to be educated about the codes or the requirements. I think that's that's going to be the industry's job to tell them.
Yeah, and I do see new electrical panels on here, so main panel upgrades are a big deal, definitely. And the main panel upgrade problem sort of falls in between the AHJ and the utility. And that makes it even more tricky, but it's definitely one of the most expensive surprise costs we face. There are ways to figure out if the system might need that on your own, but we do often depend on the AHJ to have the expertise here, depending on the size of the company. There are some really advanced solutions, non-wires alternatives and such to new electric panel upgrades, like volt-var settings and such. Like smart inverters basically can help solve some of this problem. And so I think we just have to convince more and more AHJs and utilities to be comfortable with these new settings that are within our inverters. There's others that are related to storage for no grid charging, no grid export, et cetera, that are UL certified, and we still have utilities and such questioning the legitimacy of these certifications. So it's going to take time, but I really think we're on the edge of a paradigm shift with some of this. I'm excited to answer the next question.
Did you want to add anything before we move on?
Yeah, the only one I'll add to this one I can think of are things like the rapid shutdown requirements. But again, those are all things done for safety reasons. I don't see that being the jurisdiction's responsibility to try to inform its constituents about all those details. Customers are going to learn about those typically during their sales meetings. That we're adding these extra components to your system. It makes it safer, type of thing. And that's how I see that question.
And the place to argue about those items is at the code hearings where the codes are changed. Because once it comes to the jurisdiction,
That's done.
it's a really big deal for them not to use something that's in the national code. So really, those definitely are battles, and there are lots of issues there, but the code hearings, I think, are the place for those battles, not going in and telling a local HJ, why do you have this rapid shutdown requirement?
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
We do have maybe time for just one last question and a couple minutes remaining. So I think we have to ask, how many AHJs do you think will be early adopters of the solar app?
I'm so excited to see. The interest is overwhelming at the moment. We're trying to figure out how we're going to support all of it. And this year, I think it'll be a dozen or so. We have to be careful about when we're testing and piloting it, that it's with a brave AHJ that's not gonna get really mad and then go, turn everybody else off to it. We're gonna work very closely with the code entities to test this thing and get their name on it too, and then help get the word out through all these code entities as well. So it won't be the industry talking to the AHJs, it'll be ICC and IAEI and NFPA and UL and everybody else sending the email out for us and actually even helping us onboard. However, in 2021, I think the potential is huge. And, some of the other good questions here that I want to just quickly answer is like, well, don't they want the standard and the control and everything else? Honestly, I have seen AHJs more interested in each other and like, hey, what are you doing and how do you solve this problem? Getting together and actually trying intentionally to standardize within a region. And we just want to help them do that at a larger level. There are, of course, local geographic and geologic issues we have to help the AHJs solve for, and we will have some flexibility in the portal, but it'll be limited. They will see that probably we have more questions in the portal than they have asked on their application, so it's probably more rigorous. Someone else asked about safety and how this will affect quality. It's going to increase the quality. There's a reason why SIA and Sunrun are in this. Sunrun works with a lot of local installers. We want the system to help train you, help make your permitting process easier, help you make sure you're always using compliant components and such so you can get your install done faster too. SIA wants that as well. When SIA hears about bad installs, it hurts all of us. So we actually think that this is using a computer system to run advanced compliance checks to make sure that the quality is near perfect on every question. This becomes a printout that is our permit and also an inspection checklist for the inspectors to go out and make sure we didn't lie. And as Larry said, or mislead or get an answer wrong or whatever. So this inspection checklist will be used probably in tandem with another technology that'll be connected, being developed by the Institute for Building and Safety Technology with everybody else that's doing solar app. And it'll allow virtual inspections where someone at the solar company could go out with a cell phone and just basically show an inspector around through a Skype or FaceTime call, take some pictures when they want it, and just get it done. So we actually are not trying to get rid of inspection. We want to make inspection more efficient and stronger and more empowered so that the building permit process can be more automatic and safe. And last, the incentive question. An AHJ, I don't believe, is incentivized to create more permitting requirements. That would increase their need for headcount. I actually think that they are incentivized to increase their revenue. And so when they get good ideas from the industry, and I'm not just talking about the building department, they might not always be motivated because they fear this might replace their job. It won't. But a city manager or a mayor is the entity that really cares. And I want to tell you a very fast story when net metering went away in Nevada. And the entire industry basically crashed. And then it came back. And it grew faster than ever before. And it's very healthy now. I went to go talk to North Las Vegas, a low-income AHJ, about the solar app and instant permitting and everything else. And they told us our revenues crashed when you crashed. Like, we were hurting. It was the recession. We lost the solar industry, our #1 source of revenues. It was a devastating period for them. When we came back, it was like a miracle. And they were willing to have these discussions with us. We matter to AHJs. We matter to revenues. That means we're helping all across these cities and counties with all kinds of services, libraries, police, firefighters, et cetera. Like, this is a really important role that we have in climate change and society in general. And they really see that when you pitch it right. And there are some great solar app handout. There's one solar app handout we have with all these talking points that you'll be able to find either through me, Karyn.Boenker@sunrun.com, Jeff Cook, which is an easier name to write down and without having to spell out loud, jeff.cook@nrel.gov. We can be main contacts for you. And of course, SIA can get you in contact with us as well.
Well, thank you so much. At this point, I want to thank our expert panelists for being here today and sharing your thoughts with us and sharing your expertise. And thank you all for coming and joining the discussion as well. Thank you so much.